You're listening to Vancouver Culp Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We're coming to you from the unceded traditional territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and this is the show that dares to change how we think about mental health. Welcome to ReThreading Madness.
I can't seem to find my way under or over or through. Just when I'm ready to give up the fight, there you are when we turn out the lights, and it's alright, it's alright, don't you worry.
You're listening to ReThreading Madness on Vancouver Culp Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and today I'm talking with Kassandra, who's a former foster kid who now does equity and human rights work and is finishing her MA at Royal Roads in Global Leadership. Welcome, Kassandra.
Thank you so much, Bernadine, for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. This really is my pleasure having you. We're going to talk about some probably very triggering material for those who have gone through sexual abuse in their childhood or trauma, maybe domestic violence. So I just want everybody to know that ahead of time, and that you need to do what it is you need to do to take care of yourself during this hour. So, Kassandra, you made a post on Facebook that was riveting, and it talked about your childhood and the trauma you had gone through in your childhood as a former foster kid. You've lived in many places over the time, but you talked about how you had different names and you experienced different things. And I'm just going to leave it there and have you go ahead and tell us a little bit about what happened in your childhood.
Yeah, thank you. I think, now at 37 years old, looking back at the life I lived as a child, I can say I look back at it as a time in my life where I was very fragmented and not really stable. There was a lot of moving around. There was a lot of moving parts. And, I was born to a mother who was a refugee, and she was, quite frankly, a child when she had me. And so the effects of that intergenerational trauma, the effects of her migrating from Chile to BC, with her father, who had been tortured in prison by Pinochet and his men, right? Her father, my grandfather, was Mapuche. He was a member of the Communist Party, and he was a manager at the ports. And so he was just a triple threat and was treated as such. And so, when I think about my mom at 16, 17 years old, when she had me, her being a child and the trauma that she was dealing with at that time, that was all she knew when she had me. And that trauma, it creates a cycle, right? It will keep cycling and keep repeating itself and keep manifesting itself until there is some sort of an interruption in that cycle. And so she gave me into foster care when I was less than a year old for a little while because of her own mental health. And, I know this because at 34 years old, when my husband was in Honduras because of a deportation, I FOI'd a copy of my file from the Ministry of Children and Family Development here in BC. And so what I got in the mail was this huge 1,400 page package. Oh my God. It was like, this is the manuscript of the first 19 years of my life. And, at that time, I was still drinking and self-medicating. And so I, got a bottle of wine and sat down with the package that night when I got home from work. And, I started at page 1. And by about 6 o'clock in the morning, I had finished both the bottle of wine and the package. I had gone through every page.
Oh my gosh. And how
and
were you at the end of that? What did you learn?
I learned so much, and I felt so many things all at once. I felt defeated and deflated and abandoned and forgotten, and I felt abused and mistreated, but I also felt complete. I felt whole. I felt like there were pieces of my puzzle that had finally been put back together. And although the edges were frayed, I was able to see the picture in a way that I had never been able to see it before. And so I was grateful in a way. It was like this sick and twisted, multi-layered reaction, I guess, to everything that I had read. And, I slept until probably afternoon the next day. And then I just sat with it. I sat with it for a long time. So when I go back to my mother and I go back to the fact that, she only had certain tools to deal with when she brought me into this world. And I think my childhood really reflected hers in a way, because, when I talk about my step parents, when I was under the name Nikki, I was Nikki from 1 to 4 years old, and I was with this couple who had adopted me. That couple was the same, or at least the woman from that couple was the same stepmother that my mother was left with when she was a kid, when my grandpa was going through his trauma. So when I talk about the effects of colonialism and imperialism and intergenerational trauma, it's very much wrapped up in the story of my family. It's very much my story. It's very much my origins. And it's very much the cycle that I seek to end in my life and in my children's life. When I do have children. I don't have children yet, but I'm getting ready to.
There's so many levels to undoing that trauma and creating an intervention that actually means your children move forward free from it, because we can stop the actual physical trauma from happening, but we also role model for a much longer period of time the ways that we coped, which can be a problem in and of themselves. So I my hat off to you for doing this before you have children, and it is a big deal. And I always think that the people that come out of intergenerational trauma and take it on to stop it are heroes. That's what they are. They're heroes. You talked about living with step parents and being adopted, and how many different families did you live with?
Oh gosh, so many. There was the family that adopted me, the couple that adopted me when my name was Nikki. And then once I, naively told my stepmom about the things that my stepdad was doing with me as a young child, and just how exactly it was that I got those cookies that I was eating before dinner, which of course, you're never supposed to have sweets before dinner. So my stepmom knew that something was up, and I told her quite innocently exactly all of the things that we had done and that the cookies were my reward. And I think she looked at me as like little 3-year-old Nikki, and I just remember her crumbling. She just crumbled. And, later that evening, we were at the police station, and I remember this woman cop who was listening to me again, innocently, because I didn't understand exactly what had gone on.
Right. No, they were, I'm sure. I mean, that's what
Like,
child molesters do. They tell children, this is all normal. Everybody does this. Anyway, go ahead. You were talking to a police officer?
and she broke down in tears and had to leave the room. And I was just confused about how I had made her sad, right?
Mhm.
Because, of course, also as a child in these situations, you learn that everything is your fault always. And that
Yes.
if something is not right and somebody is crying, it's your fault. And you don't know how you did it, but you did it.
Yeah.
So that was family number 2, right?
So family number 1 was your mom and
Family number
grandpa?
1, my mom, my grandpa, and the woman that he married
Right.
after my grandmother died.
Right.
And then, I don't really count family number 2, which was the Foster family in Port Hardy and Port McNeil, but I guess that really was family number 2. This would have been family number 3, the family that adopted me, but it's the first family that I really remember
Right.
living with, right? Because
Right.
my earliest memories are the memories of what happened with my stepdad.
Right.
And then once the police, found out what was happening, I was put into foster care in that area of the country where I was living at the time. And then I was moved in to a second foster home before hopping on a plane with a social worker and coming back out to BC.
So you had 2 more foster homes after getting away from your step parents where the abuse was happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually, sorry?
And then you came back to BC?
Then I came back to BC and I lived with one of my biological mother's friends for a while. And then I was put up for adoption again. And I was adopted for a short time by a Chilean couple. And the husband in that couple got congenital heart failure. And that, coupled with the fact that I was an exceptionally angry young person, and that I was really, really traumatized at that age. And I don't know that couple really had the coping mechanisms to support me through that kind of trauma. So their lack of coping mechanisms, coupled with my exceptional needs at the time, ended up in me being given back again to the system. And then after they gave me back
I'm
to the
just
government.
going to stop, Kassandra. I just need to stop because there was something happening with your audio. Can you just check all your connections?
Oh, yeah. Everything is connected.
It was just cutting out. Oh, okay. All right. So just go back, and they brought you back to what you put in your post, the pet store, which was just shocking.
There is, there is definitely a saying in the community of kids who have been adopted that, it can feel sometimes like you've been picked out of a pet store, right? And so it's just kind of a running inside joke among people who are adopted kids who have been kind of in and out of the system. So they brought me back to the pet store, and that's when I moved in with the foster family that I ended up being with for almost 12 years.
12 years is a long time. Was that a healing thing for you, or was it just a stopgap?
I think it was in a lot of ways. I think in a lot of ways it was healing, but also simultaneously it was harmful. And not because my foster parents wanted to cause harm. I mean, I still talk to my foster dad to this day. I still talk to their biological daughter to this day. But there was abuse that happened in that home that they weren't aware of. And, like they would leave me with their biological son when they went away. And there were things that he did that were not appropriate. Like, as a grown man, you don't get out alcohol when you're babysitting an 11-year-old and play strip poker with her.
No, absolutely not.
You don't do it. So there were a lot of things that happened in that home that shouldn't have. There were, and of course, living in a foster home and being two of the constants in the foster home is what I call it, right? My foster brother, who is an adult living with developmental disabilities, was the other constant. So it was the two of us kind of trying to look out for each other while there was a barrage of other kids just coming in and out and in and out. Each of them brought with them their own traumas and their own baggage and their own behaviors that were sometimes violent or sometimes overly sexual. And there were a lot of things, that happened in that home just as a result of where everybody was at the time. And so, and there's also like a cultural kind of disparity between my foster parents and their understanding and their way of the world, the way they understood religion, the way they understood spirituality, the way they didn't understand their privilege, and the way that I, as a young brown kid, was treated in that home, right? I was always definitely a second-class citizen. I was always less than, and my job was to clean up after people or to give massages or to give pedicures or
oh my God,
to be of service.
Yes, I'm hearing the pattern in there. It kind of is horrifying because here you are in the place where you spent 12 years and 12 formative years, and it doesn't feel like you're home by the sounds of it. And you're there sort of like Cinderella to be of service to other people. And when what you really needed was somebody to take care of you because you were still a child. We need to take a little break, folks, but don't go away. We'll be right back with Kassandra.
Do you feel unsafe in your home?
You are not alone.
Transition houses offer free support and shelter for women and children.
We are here for you.
We are here for you.
We are here for you.
Make the call.
1-800-VICTIM-LINK.
1-800-563-0808.
bcsth.ca.
You're listening to ReThreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and I'm chatting with Kassandra today about a difficult topic on sexual abuse in childhood. And Kassandra, you've given us a fairly clear picture of your childhood, that it was full of trauma. Like the trauma was more normalized for you than the idea of living with two people whose job it was to take care of you and make sure you had all your needs met and that you were safe and feeling secure and loved. You had the exact opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, that almost wasn't the worst part of it all, is that I think one of the dynamics that made it even more challenging was the failure of the system at the time to intervene, right? So when I, again, going back to this, 1,400 page package that I got in the mail that I asked for, right?
Yeah.
Like I signed up for that punishment / healing. I think about the language that was used to describe me at, beginning at 5 years old. There was a psychiatrist who I guess had been brought in to assess me, because that's a thing that happens when kids go into foster care in a new province, is they get a psych assess done to kind of see what the deal is. And I was diagnosed as suicidal at the age of 5.
Wow.
And I think that was one of the things that struck me hardest when I read through that package.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Suicidal ideations at 5 years old. Kassandra looked at me and told me that she would rather just die so that she could start over again.
Oh my goodness.
And I have to tell you that I also stayed in that place for my whole adolescence, and probably until about 30, 31 years old.
Mm-hmm. So,
and
suicidal for basically most of your life. That kind of makes sense. I mean, the childhood that you had was so very, very traumatic that, as a child, you don't have many coping skills. We have very, very few coping skills. But if you're left with the memories and the images and the things that people have done and said to you, then I can see a 5-year-old getting to that place. And it's a very sad place for a 5-year-old. And it's very sad that was the majority of your life.
Yeah. And I guess, through all of that, one has to function, right? And so I went through the motions, and I did kind of okay in school because it was a distraction, right? And it was a welcome distraction. And then after school, or I guess before school ended, I came to a point with my foster mom where we just weren't seeing eye to eye, and I felt really villainized by her and unseen by her. And so I moved out on independent living.
Mm-hmm.
And then I began the real kind of journey of trying to find myself, trying to find where I fit in, reacting to going from a ton of rules to not so many rules, reacting to my ministry representatives, my social workers, and how they interacted with me, or how they made decisions for me that I did or didn't agree with.
This is after you left and went on independent living?
This is when I was on independent living, yeah.
So independent living isn't really independent living. It's you get to live on your own, but other adults are making decisions for you about what you should and should not do in your life.
Yeah, it's almost like it's kind of like a transition from being in foster care to living truly on your own, right? Like your rent gets paid by the government, and you get some money for food, and it's cheaper than paying a foster parent. So, the government saves some money that way. But also, I guess I'd say that if I hadn't been on independent living after being in foster care and before being just cut off ministry care at 19, I don't know that I would have survived, because, there was a lot of exploration that I was able to do, and a lot of messing up that I was able to do, knowing that my rent was paid no matter what at the end of the month, right? And I wasn't going to end up out on the street, at least until after I was 19.
So what kinds of things did you deal with as consequences from what was left over from your childhood? How did it impact you in those years?
I think I definitely was rebellious. Nobody could tell me anything. I did not trust authority. I also always felt the need to be of service, right? And I always felt the need to be helpful. And if I was just helpful enough, then, people would accept me. And I think that's kind of what landed me in the line of work that I ended up working in. I remember, having a job at a shoe store and then being fired for calling in sick, and then being with a partner who got me a job at a grocery store downtown. And, we ended up unionizing that grocery store, and I ended up working with the union for a while, because somebody who doesn't have a lot of respect for authority and somebody who loves to be of service is a great person to work in the labor movement. It's a great person to do organizing work and membership service work. And it actually was a really great fit. But the problem was I hadn't dealt with my trauma, and I was still self-medicating, and I was still self-harming, and I was still trying to show up at the office on Monday mornings with my head held high. And the way that I was able to interact in the world was not me showing up as my best self.
What does that mean?
It means that I was not good at managing my triggers. I was abusive. I was volatile. And it wasn't always matching the behaviors of the people that I was coming into contact with. And so I felt like I had turned into this monster, right? Like the monster that everybody said that I was when I was younger, or the monster that I had internalized that I must have been when I was younger, to get the treatment that I got at the hands of the adults in my life who were supposed to care for me, had manifested itself. And I had become the expectation, or I had become my own expectations, and I had become the expectations of the predominantly white bureaucrats who were handling my file throughout ministry care, right? I had manifested that self. And then, I went back into the grocery store for a while. I worked there for a while. I found out, funnily enough, or just awfully enough, that the person who abused me sexually when I was a kid, my stepdad, was working beside me in the same grocery store
Oh my God.
that we unionized on the other side of the country, no less. And I remember,
Sorry, I got lost there. He was in the same grocery store, but on the other side of the country, or?
Yeah, so I lived with that couple, with Pierre and his wife,
Right.
Joanne, in Montreal and then Ontario.
Okay. So was he still in Montreal when you just, I'm confused. I'm sorry. So you said that you were working in the same store, but he was working in Montreal and you were here. Did I get that right?
No, so when
okay, sorry.
when I lived with them, when they adopted me, they were in Montreal. Like we lived together in Montreal and then Ontario. And then I was in a couple of foster homes in Ontario. And then I came back out on a plane with a social worker to BC.
Right.
Yeah. And so in my head, I was on the other side of the country from him. Like he never left that side of the country. And it wasn't because, you know, trauma does things to our brains and protects us from things that we don't really want to know. I, at the time, was a smoker. And so I was out for a smoke break we were working at this grocery store. And he came out to me and sat beside me. And we talked a little bit about my childhood and about the trauma that I had had. And I told him, you know, my stepdad sexually abused me, and then he sold me to a priest. And I just had this memory of him telling me that was my godfather, and then laughing, right? And the priest being like, that's not funny. And then he left me with that priest, and, you know, like things happened, and I screamed bloody murder, and he had to come pick me back up. And his words to me were, you remember that. And I, again, didn't compute. And I was like, yep, you know, and he said something to me. He said, my name's not what it was at the time, right? How I knew him. He says, it's Pierre. And he said, I think your life is so messed up because of me. And now that I know who I am, and now that I know who you are, I need to do the right thing and just get away. And he stopped working at our grocery store 2 weeks after that. And I remember just being confused by the whole thing and just kind of playing it off like everything was fine, right? Like that I had no idea that he was this person. And it was later on, it was just a year ago, that I really put it together and absorbed the memories. And I had this huge kind of moment where I reached out to other people who knew him and knew me back then. And I was on this quest, like I had to find him and I had to face him. And, you know, I wanted him to tell me, like, how did you know it was me? At what point did you know it was me? How long did we work together beside each other before you figured out who I was and then left, right? And there was a mentor figure in my life back then when I knew this man and was working in the grocery store beside him. And we had lunch just, you know, last year, and we talked at length about it. And he said to me, if I find him, what do you want? Like, how do you want me to deal with it? Do you want me to just find him and then call you after that? And I said, yeah. And you know, like, don't treat him horribly, because later on in life, he figured out who I was, and then he got out of my way, right? Like he actually did the honorable thing by leaving the grocery store that we worked at after he figured out who he was to me in my life.
Does that feel like a gift?
It feels like it feels like the best I could have expected out of him.
Mm-hmm.
It feels
it's actually shocking. Most offenders don't behave in kind ways when they're outed. So we have to take a little break, Kassandra. So I'm just going to do that here, even though I know we're not finished this part of the story, but we just need to take a little break, folks, and we'll be right back.
Created by your First Nations Health Managers Association, we introduce InfoPoint, a convenient and accessible helpful desk for First Nations health managers looking for credible sources of information on COVID-19. Don't have time to dig? Talk to a real person now at 1-855-446-2719 or email infopoint@fnhma.ca. Indigenous Health Today is another resource of information by region at ihtoday.ca.
This old house would have burnt down a long time ago. Make me an angel that flies from Montgomery. Make me a poster of an old rodeo. Just give me one thing that I can hold. Cowboy. There weren't much to look at, just a free rambling man. But that was a long time, and no matter how I tried, those years just flow by like a broken down dam. Make me an angel that flies. I can hear them, they're buzzing, and I ain't done nothing since I woke up today. How the hell can a person go to work in the morning and come home in the evening and have nothing to say?
You're listening to ReThreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and we're about to go back into my chat with Kassandra, But I just want to remind you all that we are talking about her experience of childhood trauma, and as such, it can be triggering for others. Please do what you need to take care of yourself while listening. How you doing?
I'm okay. And actually, when you asked me, was it a gift? I think it's the best I could have expected out of him. The person that I was having lunch with, who was a real mentor figure to me back then, and still is, was like, well, do you want me to punch this guy in the face? And I said, no, because he actually did do the right thing. And he actually did get out of my way. And he said, this mentor figure that I was having lunch with last year said to me, I doubt that he's even still alive, because he was in such a dark place. Like it was very apparent that he was using, and that he was deep in his addiction. And I think that's what brought me to my own understanding was, this was a man who was not in his right mind when he did what he did to me. And when I think of the ways that I've been abusive in the past, it has always been moments where I have been so deep in my own pain that I haven't realized the pain that I've caused to others.
Right.
It's the way that I think about my mother. It's the way that I think about my grandfather. It's the way that I think about anybody who has hurt me or anybody who I've harmed. It's the way that I've been able to forgive myself for the ways in which I harmed and abused while I was acting out of my trauma.
Right.
And it's the way that I continue in my resolve to work through my trauma, right? And I think this is how I found my healing, right? I found my healing by being able to look at myself in the mirror and say, you know what, Kassandra, you're not a monster. You're just a person who has a lot of trauma. And it was through learning to love the pieces of myself, learning to love those fragments that I was split into throughout my childhood and my adolescence. It was learning to embrace every one of those pieces that I was able to then coax those pieces back into myself and back into my core. And if I had to characterize what healing has looked like for me, it has really been learning to love every single one of those pieces. And I've done it with the help of friends who are just generous, loving souls. I've done it through therapists. So I do have a psychologist who I see and I have a great relationship with, and I've seen 2 other psychologists voluntarily in my life. And
I like that, voluntarily. Yes.
There's so
requires being, yes, no, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. It requires being willing to do it. And I think because I was forced into so many counseling environments that were not holistic, they were not culturally appropriate, they were not gentle with me when I was in care. I avoided any type of counseling or therapy or psychology for the longest time while I could, right? But I escaped care. And so it took me a while to come back and to want to come back. And I'm glad I did. And psychology might not be the thing for everybody, right? But for me, it was an opening into a door. And now I explore different methods of healing. I explore what our Indigenous spirituality is back in Chile, right? I'm being more connected with my Chilean roots and that spirituality, and being more connected through searching my DNA for what the spirituality is that are indigenous on my biological father's side would have been. I'm seeking somatic trauma therapy because sometimes talking about it can be re-traumatizing.
Absolutely. And there's some parts of trauma that just don't have words. You're talking about trauma that happened between 1 and 4. There's a lot of that doesn't have words attached to it. Somatic therapy makes it possible to process that without the narrative.
Exactly. And it's such a gift. There are certain yoga poses. I remember my first 4 sessions of yoga when I really got into it. At the end, we do a shavasana, they call it at the end. It's like the lying down pose where your body is supposed to absorb all of the goodness that you just gave to it throughout class. And I remember just silently sobbing uncontrollably because I had so much that I had been carrying that I needed to release. And I did. And I still do to this day. I think I probably cry every day, at least twice, and sometimes they're happy tears, and sometimes they're angry tears, and sometimes it's just a physical release. And it's a gift that I give to myself every day. Yes. Is that ability to be open, to be raw, to be vulnerable. And my posts on Facebook are a part of that gift that I give to myself of coming out into the world and being public about the fact that I wasn't okay for a long time, but that I am now.
That is very clear, Kassandra. You have come a very, very far way, a ways from that childhood. So, and it's interesting how you talk about the, being vulnerable and raw and sharing that acceptance, in my opinion, saying these things, and the world doesn't come to an end and nobody hates you, and and that people still care about you and still accept you and still have coffee with you. That kind of acceptance is one of the most healing things on the planet. We talk about love and compassion, and all of those things are important, but for me, it's also acceptance, that we accept people how they come to us and honor that. And I think that when you make these posts on Facebook, which is how I ended up becoming aware of your story, that's a part of it, that you are being accepted. Your story is being accepted. All of these parts who went through these horrible things, they're not monsters. They're people. They're you. So my hat is off to you, Kassandra. Well done.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So what's the future hold for Kassandra?
I am trying to figure that out. I mean, I'm doing a master's degree, which, I was at the point of my capstone project before the end of the year last year. And I finished my last course for my master's degree in about April of last year. And for some reason, it just was life event after life event just kept smacking me in the face, and I wasn't able to finish my capstone project. And I think part of that was that I wasn't ready emotionally to go into the work and to do it in a way that would serve my best purpose for where I want to be 10 years from now. And so now I'm just in the process of rethinking my capstone project and really figuring out what is the work that I want to do 10 years from now. And I've considered everything from, taking getting a degree in psychology and being a therapist to help other people, to, going a more non-traditional route and a more holistic route, and being a consultant and somebody who does somatic trauma therapy, but also does equity, justice, diversity, and inclusion work, and molds those together. Because I think that there are many ways in which the trauma that we receive in childhood, or the trauma that we go through in childhood, mirror some of the relationships that we get into in our working lives and in the institutions that we kind of interact with on a day-to-day basis. And I really believe that whenever we're doing work that creates social change, that we also have to be doing trauma release work at the same time, because we're all traumatized, whether we choose to admit it or not. We are all traumatized by the systems that we're forced to live and work within these days. So
yeah, I agree. And it doesn't matter what kind of trauma, it's all relative. And there is no hierarchy of abuse. It just is trauma. Trauma is trauma. Thank you, Kassandra, for coming and chatting with me and being your vulnerable, raw self, and sharing this story with my listeners. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for this work.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. And we'll be right back, folks.
Hey, did you know Red Eye has a podcast? You can tune in to Red Eye every Saturday morning from 10 a.m. to noon, and now you can catch our interviews anytime. Look for the Red Eye podcast on iTunes, TuneIn Radio, or a host of other podcast apps. Or you can check out our latest episode right on our website, coopradio.org/redeye.
Are you a renter in Vancouver, wondering how you'll be able to pay rent during the pandemic? Are you worried about rent debt, or the possibility you might be evicted from your home? The Vancouver Tenants Union has your back. They have been very busy during the COVID-19 crisis, trying to effect legislative change that protects renters all over the city from rent debt, rent increases, and eviction. Find out how you can be involved by visiting their website at vancouvertenantsunion.ca, or send them an email at tenantsunion.yvr@gmail.com.
You've been listening to ReThreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and I've been chatting with Kassandra about her experience of childhood trauma. It has been a riveting conversation, and I want to express my gratitude for her ability to be raw and authentic for us in this conversation. I am grateful to Pat Benatar, Bonnie Raitt, and Sherry Ulrich for the gift of their music, but as always, my thanks goes out to you for joining us today. Stay safe out there. If you have questions or feedback about this program, or want to share your story, or have something to say to us, we want to hear from you. You can reach us by email, rethreadingmadness@coopradio.org. This is Bernadine Fox. We'll be back next week. Until then.
When I can't seem to find my way under or over or through, just when I'm ready to give up the fight, there you are when we turn out the lights, and it's alright, it's alright. Don't you worry, it'll be alright. Why do I always believe it when such a cliche, just words people say to be nice.